Okay, go ahead to the next slide because we know we're new in the area. Uh, and I always am interested about where people come from because uh, if you come from the northern area, you'll know more about the sun location, and so you're familiar with that, but may not be able to um, winter over some of your plants and products. So that may be a question. If you're from the South, and I've gardened in South Carolina, maybe you can't grow broccoli. Maybe you don't want to grow broccoli. From the East, you're questioning what is this no humidity, because our humidity here compared to the East Coast is very low, and that's going to affect growing vegetables also. And most of my talk today is going to be about vegetables and fruits and berries, because to get into trees, bushes, and shrubs along with that is going to take another 4 hours. And I'm not the best person to ask questions on that. So we're going to concentrate on fruits and berries and mostly vegetables. The West, a lot of folks coming out from California or Arizona or those places don't know and haven't dealt with clay soil. So that's another issue. And the Midwest, uh, I lived in Ohio, so the highest mountain you had in the Midwest was the overpass. So elevation is going to be an issue for a lot of people also. So go ahead, Gary, next slide. So think about where you're coming from and what your issues might be and what you know about your old way of gardening and what you may have to change with the new way of gardening. And here are the things that we're going to consider. Type of soil. In Cowlitz County, we've got a lot of clay. Although there are some areas like down by the river that has a lot of sand. So it's typical, but it's not everywhere. Sun location, um, our location in the wintertime of where the sun comes up and where it goes down is going to be totally different from the summertime when you're doing most of your gardening. Type of climate, we'll talk about that a little bit because we do have a specific type. Day and night temperatures are going to be different, especially if you're used to humidity, because that's going to be a wide swing. We have different pests here also, and we'll talk about those a little bit, although not um, in total. And the diseases and weeds, and then of course location, which not only deals with your house, but it also deals with your garden. Next slide. Majority of soil here is clay. If you have dug into it at all and you find that that's the case, I feel for you because I've got the same thing. I could almost make pottery out of my soil. It's got so much clay in it. And when you do decide to amend the soil, or if you do decide to amend the soil and you're growing things in the ground, um, don't deal with just sand. You can absolutely um, supplement with sand, but if you put just sand in to break up the clay, you're going to wind up with concrete. So just like a person, a human being, roughage for your soil. Roughage is good for your soil also. So your compost, chopped up leaves, chopped up straw, garden goodies, whatever you can throw in there to decompose is going to be what you need to amend that soil. And there are um, different amendments that you can get from your nursery, and we have different locations that have good garden soil amendments. One of the best places I've found is Castle Rock and the 4-in-1 soil. And that seems to be a really good blend of garden soil. There is another company in Longview that has what they consider garden soil, but I've had hit and miss with that. So it,
I should write that down.
yeah, um, it's sometimes it's great and sometimes it's not great. So best thing to do is blend everything up so you have uh, a more complex situation as far as soil goes. And we've got a class on soil, so you might think about taking that. So it's a good way to get started. Soil here tends to be acidic. You look at all the fir trees and the pine trees, and yep, it's acidic. Get it tested because you don't know what the level is. Ours isn't too bad here at my property, but I've heard of other people who it's 5.5 or 6, and it's they need to amend that quite a bit to bring it up. So soil test not only for acidity but also for trace elements. Great idea. And guess what? We also have a class on that. Some of the options that we're going to consider are raised beds and containers, because if you have a raised bed, you're going to do a couple things, and a container. You're going to not only be able to control that soil, but you're also going to be able to control the moisture and the heat and the curse, more or less. So it has several benefits. Now, in raised beds, you can make them out of just about anything. We've got ours made out of cinder block. And for me personally, the cinder block works really well because I stack them too high and I can sit down and I can weed. And that helps with physical labor and trying to get down to the plants physically. It also makes it easier to put a row cover over it or anything to protect it. And you can put irrigation in it, and you can have a better control over what you're trying to do. Containers, I did a lot of containers this year, mainly because I grew too many tomato plants. I'll just admit it right here. I grew, and it was for a good cause. I was going to donate them to the plant sale, which didn't happen. So I had about 30 tomato plants, and so I had big buckets and things to put the tomato plants in, and they did extremely well. I also grew my peppers and my eggplant and carrots in buckets, and they did well. And I grew celery for the first time in buckets, and it did well. And I've never grown celery before, but I went ahead and grew that. And because celery likes a bog, and I have sunny spots, but the sunny spots that I have on my property don't have a boggy ground. So, and the boggy ground that I have is down the hill in the forest, in the wooded area, but there's no sun. So I put a tray of gardening tray out with water in it and put a couple buckets of celery in it, and they did great. So if you want a real challenge, grow celery. Next slide. Sun location. Okay. We're further north in parts of Canada. How does that feel? If you're from Minnesota, you don't care. If you're from California or Arizona or Southeast US, you do care because your winter arc and your summer arc are going to be different. So if you've got fir trees and you're shaded in the wintertime with the fir trees, you may not be shaded in the summertime. If you've got a building, we have a building that we've done here, and I planted my raised beds on the north side of the building. And you think, well, that's crazy because you're not going to get any sun. But the sun rises so high from just about May through August that I get full sun. So the building doesn't matter, and the trees might not matter. You just have to look at your summer arc and winter arc and where do they go. Now, I won't plant broccoli or peas or my spring crops in those boxes, but I can plant short time summer crops like squash and tomatoes. Remember, I said I had a lot of tomatoes. And even beans. I had a bumper crop of beans in those boxes, but it's because they could get full sun when I wanted to plant them in the beds and when I needed to harvest. So take a look at your buildings and your trees and everything, and that sun is going to change location in the summertime. Days and nights, your days are going to be warm in the summertime, but your nights are going to be cool. And that has to do not necessarily with sun location, although when you have a long day in the summertime, it is going to warm up in the daytime, but your nights are going to be cool. So if you're used to humidity and you are used to a warmer nighttime, I know in South Carolina, we had nighttime temperatures that were upper 70s. And my corn and my tomatoes and my hot weather crops, okra, cotton, peanuts, all of them love that temperature. But here I'd be hard pressed to grow some of that. Now, it's not impossible, but you're going to have to plan for it. And the sun location in the wintertime is definitely going to be much, much lower. So if you're planting on a fall crop, because we have the long springs and the long falls, and you thought, well, I can put in a fall crop and we can get this going again. You're going to have to plan extra time on that because the sun you'll be missing a lot of the sun as it goes down in the fall and the winter time. So growing those plants will be much slower. That makes sense so far? Okay, on to the next slide. Believe it or not, we're in some place called the Northern Mediterranean climate. And Mediterranean to me is misleading, but honestly we are. It goes as far north as British Columbia. So all that means is we have hot, dry summers and cool, wet winters. And I'm not hearing it. Say that again.
G2. I think it was just interference from outside.
Oh, okay, okay. Most of our temperatures in this county are going to be G2, and there is another one there, but it has to do with the mountainous areas, so it may be G1. It's colder in the winter and not quite as warm in the summer. So the mountains are going to have an awful lot to do with your temperatures and how you grow things. But we're considered a Northern Mediterranean climate. I'll give everybody time to figure out where the heck they are. And you notice Portland is, I think, an F2 instead of a G2. So the F2 actually is a warmer area. And when I first started gardening here, I started gardening in Portland in the 70s. And I thought, well, this isn't too bad. I can grow corn, I can grow beans, I can grow tomatoes. The soil is nice because we were in the Willamette Valley. Well, Cowles County is just north of the Willamette Valley. And so everything that happens in the Willamette Valley didn't happen to us. So the soil is different and the temperatures are a little bit different. So if you're coming from the Portland area, it's going to be a little bit different. Not a whole lot, but a little bit. Next slide. I like that map, by the way. Humidity makes a difference. And we talked a little bit about the day-night temperatures, where it can go up to 100 degrees here in the summertime. It may go down to the 60s because of low humidity. So that's going to be a little bit different than if you're coming in from Ohio or the Southeast, or even anywhere where the humidity is a little bit higher. Minnesota and east, I think we're looking at. So it does make a difference in the speed in which you're produce or your plants will grow. Your tomatoes will be a little slower um, because of the day-night temperatures and the wide swing in those temperatures. Your peppers will be slower. Eggplant will be slower. All of those things will be slower in growing because the temperature drops so much and they don't have that residual heat in the nighttime. Seed catalogs. I threw this in here because we're so used to buying seeds from seed catalogs and everybody has their favorites. And I tend to get my seeds from the catalogs that are the companies that are here in the Northwest, although I get a lot of seeds from Baker Creek. And when I do that, I take a look at the dates to maturity and I reduce it by about 5 days or so because they're used to growing things and it's a quicker growth, or it takes less time to grow those seeds than it does out here. So when you are ordering your seeds, just keep that in mind. If you order from Gurney's or Burpee's or even Baker Creek, take a look at the date to maturity, and then if you want, compare them to the same variety, maybe in a seed catalog here in the Northwest, and plan accordingly because the dates will be different. So day-night temperatures will make a difference. Next slide. Dear, oh dear. And this is my buddy Fred. I found Fred marching towards my garden. So I picked Fred up and put him in another location, threw him deep in the woods where he can munch on other slugs to his heart content. I think this is a leopard slug. Correct me if I'm wrong.
That's correct.
Okay. And leopard slugs will eat other slugs, but the caveat is when they're done eating other slugs, they'll eat your garden. And this sucker was, he was about 6 or 7 inches long. So he was real healthy, very friendly, but very healthy. What's common here, if you haven't already run into it, are slugs and snails. And the snails, I never ran into snails in the 70s. I think they've come in, and we have some natives here. I just never ran into them. But they're more prevalent now that we have plants coming in from other locations. So be aware of that. Aphids, that's a common problem, especially in the fall and especially on Brussels sprouts. Just saying. Cabbage butterfly. Now, you all hear about the cabbage moth. This is the same critter, but it really is a butterfly because it flies in the daytime and its little wings are up and not out. And but people just don't like it, so they call it a moth. It's the most common butterfly in the world, if that's any consolation. Leaf miner, which destroyed my beet greens one year. We couldn't eat any beet greens because they were just, they were just lace. And voles or mice tend to run underground, and they'll use runways, or they'll create their own. They'll use the moles' runways, and they'll create havoc in your beds. And of course, the moles are here also, but they don't tend to eat vegetables. They'll eat bugs and worms and things like that. But the voles will get in their runways, and you will find that your potatoes and other root vegetables are half eaten. So just be aware of that, and you may have to do something about that when you're building your garden. What's not common here, and here's the good news, tomato hornworm. I don't think I've ever seen one here. And squash borer, I can't remember if I've seen one, but they're not common. And cucumber beetle, I think I've seen a couple, but not much. And those are the major common pests on the East Coast or in other areas. So they're not common here. You're going to have to worry about other things, but not those. And of course the deer. If you are in an area where deer can get to, and that includes the suburbs, um, and once they find your garden, they'll want to come at it over and over again. So be aware of deer. I'm sure you are. Everybody in the U.S. is aware of deer. Next slide. Okay, diseases and weeds. All I can say about diseases is that we have a wonderful plant and insect clinic, and we frequently, you can post on Facebook. We have a Facebook presence. So rather than getting into diseases, which you're probably not going to remember too much anyway, I'm going to say if you come across something like a virus, or the leaves are dying, or your apples are looking really horrendous like mine did this year, contact WSU and the Plant and Insect Clinic, and they can get you straightened out. OSU also has a good presence, so either one of those will do. But I prefer WSU just because I'm prejudiced. Weeds. We have a lot of weeds. The main ones to look for are horsetail, which I have pictured here, which is a weed that you're not going to eradicate. You can manage it, but you can't eradicate it. It's been here since prehistoric times, and it's going to remain, and that's just the way it goes. Blackberry, the Himalayan blackberry, came here in the 60s, was brought over to produce nice big large berries for the berry farms, and of course the birds got into it, and since the 60s we've had a blessing of blackberries. So harvest your blackberries and then cut them back, or use crossbow on them or something, but don't do anything with them until the fall if you're going to do anything with them. Harvest those berries first anyway. Bindweed, which is a lot like morning glory, it's first cousin to it. You'll probably, won't say you probably find that, but you might find that in your yard. So that's another thing to look out. I mean, we could go on and on about weeds, but those are the main three that I see that you may not be aware of. We have other blackberries. We have a mountain berry, and we have a couple natives, which are the vines are very gentle, and they don't grow all that much or all that fast, and the berries are delicious. You'll know what a Himalayan blackberry is by the thickness of its stalk, because the stalks can actually grow to be an inch thick, and they're voracious growers. They'll grow several feet in a season. So chances are it's a Himalayan blackberry. They are overwhelming. Okay, on to the next slide. Okay, this is a picture of my plants on the north side of a large building, and you can see some of it's in the shade right now, but that's because it was a fall time picture. The beans had already been picked. Those bean vines are up about 8 or 10 feet. And I've picked so many beans off of that we can 40 pints or something off of 2 towers. So it did extremely well. You can just barely see the roof of the building off on the upper right side. So that's how close it is. And that's, what's that? Okay, that's the cinder block beds that I've got. You can see the cinder block down below. But that's a good spot for, if you can get a good location that's sunny, even if it's on the north side of something, if you can get enough sun on it, you can deal with it. Elevation. I've had a couple people talk to me about, I didn't know elevation was going to be a problem. And here I am up at 1,000 feet, and I'm having trouble growing things. So elevation is going to affect what you grow and how you grow it. And I understand and I hear that for every 1,000 feet in elevation, you're 200 to 500 miles north. So if you're up 1,000 feet, you're essentially growing at Seattle, no, that's 200 feet, British Columbia area. So elevation is going to have a lot to do with what you grow. North side and south side, do you have a north facing or a south facing property? And it's going to make a lot of difference, especially if you have elevation, because if you have a south facing side in elevation, you can work that slope in so the sun is actually hitting at a better angle, and you can actually get more heat that way than normal. So think about your slope, your location, and your elevation. And there is an app that you can put on your phone that has an altimeter on it, and it will help you roughly guess what your elevation is if you need to know. And we talked a little bit about evergreens and buildings already. So those are shrubs, or those are trees and buildings that are going to be shading year round. If you have trees that are deciduous and you plant near them, you can actually use those trees for a springtime planting because they won't leaf out until the 1st of May. So for peas and lettuces and things that are short-term spring plants, they'll work fine. And water availability, I stuck this in here because in some locations when you plant gardens, you'll have your garden being watered every afternoon by a shower. And that's what we have in South Carolina, and I never had to water my garden. Here, because of the Mediterranean climate, we'll have a couple months where we get very little rain. In fact, this year it was 3 months where we got very little rain. So make sure that you've got water nearby, or you'll be carrying buckets to your gardens. Of course, in the springtime and fall, it's usually not a problem, and which is good for, broccolis and cabbages and lettuces and all of that. But don't count on it, because you won't always get those showers when you need them. So water availability at your location is going to be important. Next slide. What grows well here? Oh my goodness. It doesn't mean that you can't grow corn and tomatoes and peppers and all of those things. I've never tried growing peanuts here, and I don't think I want to. But it does mean that there are certain things that grow well here that may not grow well where you're coming from, or where you've gardened before. So this is a short list of some of the things that you can grow well here. And, things like Swiss chard and, where's the other one? And the herbs, and kale and collards can winter over. So, and leeks. So a lot of crops, because we have a mild winter here, can actually winter over. And at my location, which is about 170 feet in elevation, I don't even put straw or leaves over it to protect it. And unless we're going to go down to 20 degrees, and maybe I'll think about covering things, but they'll frost over a little bit and then they're fine. So we eat a lot of this stuff into winter time. I know the leeks held until January, and then they turned a little slimy, but a lot of this will hold through the winter time, and definitely through the fall. And I didn't put potatoes down here, but they do grow well. Root crops, most of your root crops will go just fine here. In the berries and fruit, most of the berries and fruit grow well here. The fruit, and of course this is northern fruit, not necessarily peaches and nectarines apricots, although you can grow them. It's a hit and miss thing on some of them. And the berries, I'm trying to think if there's any berry that you can't grow here. That's not a subtropical or a tropical berry, you know, the normal raspberry, blueberry, blackberry, brambleberry um, group. But this is an area that's known for growing berries and a lot of the fruits. Now, having said that, um, the cherries that are grown here have a problem with pollination because when they're out in bloom, the honeybees that they usually use for pollination don't make it through the rains and the mist and stuff. So now they're trying some um, experiments with native bees, and they're finding that the cherries can now be grown on this side of the mountain. Most of the times they were grown on the east side of the mountain. You knew I would put in a plug for mason bees, so there it is. Mushrooms grow exceedingly well here. In fact, I'm probably going to be doing some mushroom hunting here pretty soon. But, you know, with all the wet spring and the wet falls, you would assume that mushrooms would do fine. And I say I have root crops here twice. Sorry about that. Herbs do really well here in the lower elevations. I'm not sure about the upper elevations. We can grow rosemary and oregano and thyme, in fact, parsley. A lot of the herbs here that my sister can't grow in Virginia because of the harsher winter times, but these will also winter over and they'll be just fine. So think about growing herbs in your yard and garden. Deer don't like them. Bugs don't like it. You can go out and just pick fresh herbs when you need something to go into your soups and stews and all of that. Golden marjoram grows well here, and I use that as a ground cover. So all of that. In fact, there's probably more, but I haven't put it in yet. We're starting an herb bed. But those I know for sure are hardy, and they will winter over just fine. So we have a lot of pluses here as far as what grows here. And if you're used to an area that doesn't grow a whole lot of things really well, then you're in a good spot, because if you get the sun right and the soil right, then you can grow a lot of stuff. Next slide. Tips. Okay. Raised beds. That's one of the things that I would absolutely suggest that somebody gets started with if they're going to grow anything at all. And you see some of my tomato plants here. These are just a few. And they're in 15-gallon containers, and they did extremely well. And I had to put up 50 pints of tomato sauce and V8 juice and all of that, and then freeze a bunch of tomatoes because I freeze tomato balls and use them during the year. But the containers that you see here, just make sure if you're going to try some container planting, and it's really easy to do, and most of the time the slugs will stay out of the containers and the rabbits can't jump that high, and so it keeps a lot of critters out. Make sure the container fits the plant that you're planting in. I would not try, I understand that you can put a tomato in a 5-gallon pot, but I want to give it a little more space, so I have a 15-gallon pot for it. My pepper plants did fine in a 5-gallon container, and the eggplant did too well in a 5-gallon container. So make sure that your plant fits whatever container you're thinking about putting it in. Plant starts. If you are from another area, try growing things.
Was that you?
Hello? Anyway, try growing things, plants from starts instead of seeds. That's not always possible, but tomatoes and your hot weather loving plants, grow them from start so that when you do put them in the ground is warm. One of the tips I didn't put down, but I'll stress here, is just because it's warm and sunny out doesn't mean that the ground is warm. If you put your hand on the ground, it's going to feel warm. So you have to dig down a few inches where those roots are going to go and make sure that that's warmed up. If it's cold, then it's not going to do any good. And I'll tell you that if you put your plants in early and they don't like the cold weather, like tomato plants and peppers, they'll sit there and the plants that you plant later will pass them up. So make sure that your soil is warmed up. You notice that these pots are black. So they're warming the sun up better than in the ground. If you do a raised bed setup, you're going to get temperatures that are 5 to 10 degrees warmer than the ground. So it will actually warm things up. If you don't care what varieties, go for the earlier varieties. And so if something is 75 days or another plant is 90 days, choose the one that's 75 unless you really, really, really want that 90-day one. I have brandywines, and I got beautiful brandywines this year, but I always take a chance. But it's because I love the brandywines so much that I go ahead and plant them. And they're an 85-day tomato plant, so I'm really chancing it. But I grow them from seed, and by the time I put them in the ground, they are a foot high, and they're ready to go. And I get tomatoes off of them. So consider your variety and make sure that you're not going to be too long, because there's nothing sadder than looking at a tomato plant and seeing all green tomatoes and the rains have started. Just saying. Not that I've ever done that. Cover for spring. If you find that you've put things in and the weather has turned on you, then cover your plants up so that they don't get hit with so much rain, or they don't get hit with so much cold. And you can cover them for fall too. I just put spring down there because I was thinking of tomatoes. So covering with Rime, or I have cylinders for my tomatoes, not these, but my other tomatoes that I have fence wire that are formed into cylinders, and I can put something over the top of them so they're not beaten down by the rain. Or in the spring, when I put them out, I can actually wrap them in plastic until they've gotten used to being outside for a while, and then I take the plastic off so they get pollinated. But you can warm those things up and keep them going a lot longer. And I think that's it. Check the next slide. Yep. So, questions?